So today, we're going to look at a Bernie Sanders video called Naked Ape is a Fucking Moron. I'm sorry, we're actually going to look at a Naked Ape video called Bernie Sanders is a Fucking Moron. And the main reason I'm responding to this is because a number of people have sent me this saying, hey, look at how stupid Bernie Sanders is. Okay, so I have no animosity towards Naked Ape whatsoever, despite him launching into unprovoked attacks against me in the past. So if you're looking for ponage, look elsewhere. I'm going to refrain from personal attacks and instead focus solely on the substance. So if that sounds good to you, then let's begin.
Oh, Bernie Sanders. What more could I say about this man? The man who didn't have a steady job until he was in his 40s.
Not even true. Not even true. But so what if it was? I mean, maybe if he was only 50 now, that would make some sense. But since he's 70 now, that would mean he's had a job for 30 years. I don't think anyone can deny Bernie Sanders' work ethic. I'm sorry, considering that he campaigned like a motherfucker against Clinton. If you're going to give Trump all this credit for, oh my God, he just outworked Clinton. Well, Bernie Sanders outworked Clinton too. I went to a Bernie Sanders rally. The motherfucking thing was packed. And Bernie Sanders was leaving to do other rallies that same fucking day. Meanwhile, Clinton, she'd do like a champagne soiree with Hillary in touch with the voters, Clinton. Only $1,200 a ticket. Fucking dumb bitch.
The man who has only passed 3 bills during his long tenure in the Senate.
Well, I mean, come on. When you're the only socialist in the fucking Senate, yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to form a big coalition with the corporatists to get a bill passed. But actually, that track record is pretty fucking decent. The fact that he's been able to get anything passed is a miracle, given how far to the left he is of his contemporaries.
The man who rages against the wealthy 1% while he owns 3 houses, one of which is a $500,000 lake house he bought himself after he lost the Democratic nomination.
Look, the fact is that Bernie Sanders is one of the lowest income earners in the Senate, and this is because he didn't take massive amounts of money from big business like all of his bought and paid for fucking colleagues.
The man who cucked himself out of an election by refusing to attack Hillary Clinton despite Clinton being the literal embodiment of everything he supposedly hates.
Bernie did attack Clinton, and in fact, Trump stole many of Bernie's talking points when the general election campaign began. I assume that what you're referencing is that Bernie stopped attacking Clinton once she won the nomination of the Democratic Party. And I agree with you, that was a bad move. I'm not even going to argue with that. Bernie should have not capitulated to the Clinton dynasty.
The $15 minimum wage. The first incredulous thing about the minimum wage is the idea that it's supposed to help poor people. It's supposed to raise the living standard of the poor and stick it to those goddamn millionaires and billionaires. Except that according to data put out by the government, only 22% of people who work at the federal minimum wage are in poverty. 62% are going to school, while 68% enjoy family incomes over 150% of the poverty line, which is $33,500 for a family of 4. This is because, to much surprise, the vast majority of people working the minimum wage are younger kids and teenagers, and the older people who do work for the minimum wage are mostly working part-time for extra income and have an average household income of $42,500 per year. Increasing the minimum wage will not help poor people. Only 4% of minimum wage workers are single parents working full-time. What increasing the minimum wage will do is 2 things: increase prices and increase unemployment. The worst part is all the stores that will increase prices are all the stores that poor people shop from, like Walmart and McDonald's. And all those white teenagers and working mothers can afford to be unemployed, but 67% of people people living below the poverty line are there because they cannot find a job. The amount of unemployment caused and the amount of a price increase is an incredibly unknown and perhaps unknowable number, but what we do know is that all of the bad side effects of this law would be felt by poor people, while all of the benefits would be felt by rich white kids working during the summer while they go to college. The Heritage Foundation proclaims that 7 million jobs will be lost due to raising the minimum wage, but the LA Times simply says that minority unemployment may increase. Funnily enough, raising the minimum wage would only help white teenagers with part-time jobs at the direct expense of the working poor and minorities, which is ironically the only demographic that voted for Bernie Sanders.
When you're white, you don't know what it's like to be living in a ghetto. You don't know what it's like to be poor.
And before I hear one of you fucking morons chime in, but if you account for inflation, the minimum wage should be much higher than it already is. This is the kind of stupid point-scoring exercise that makes me question whether or not you're a sentient human being. Because A, it has nothing to do with the facts that I just gave you, and it's just a vague distraction from the real argument, and B, it's patently wrong. Adjusted for inflation, our highest minimum wage was in the 1960s. But you know what just adds insult to injury? Sweden, the country that old Bernie always points to as a bastion of social justice and socialism, doesn't have any government-mandated minimum wage at all.
All right, so there's a lot to unpack there, and a lot of it's really dry. So let me start off by saying, first of all, the poverty line is too low. There are plenty of people who are as poor as fucking dirt, don't have two fucking nickels to rub together, who don't meet the official definition of fucking poverty. For a single person to be at or below the poverty line, they have to make $11,770 a year or less. So someone who's making $15,000 a year is above the poverty line. But a person making that much has only $1,250 a month to live off of. Meanwhile, the average cost of rent on an apartment in America is $1,231 a month. Now, the cheapest city for rent in America is Wichita, Kansas, where the median rent is $623 a month, which is still half of our hypothetical not impoverished person's monthly income. So the placement of this poverty line is questionable. If you can't afford to live anywhere, in my opinion, you're fucking poor. I would set the poverty line much higher. I think America is fucking fooling itself setting it at $11,770. As you point out, the minimum wage reached its peak in 1968, when the minimum wage was about $11 an hour when you adjust for inflation. So in 1967, the year before, unemployment was at 3.8%. In 1968 itself, the unemployment rate was 3.6%, and in 1969, the year after, it was 3.5%. I don't know if you noticed, but those numbers are going down. The high minimum wage seemed to have no effect on unemployment. It may have actually had a positive effect. The minimum wage was raised in 1997, and unemployment went which way the following year? Which way did it go? That's right, down. It went down the following year from 5.3% to 4.6%. And look, I'm not making a case here that raising the minimum wage makes unemployment go down, because the statistics don't support that either. For instance, it was last raised in 2009, and unemployment did go up afterwards, but this is almost certainly attributable to the market crash of 2008 and the ensuing Great Recession. And there are other examples of unemployment going up after raising the minimum wage. So it's not like there's not evidence that it makes it go down. There's not evidence that makes it go up. Raising the minimum wage seems to have little to no effect on unemployment one way or the other. It doesn't seem to make unemployment go up or down with any sort of reliability. But we don't have to limit ourselves to looking just at the federal minimum wage, because from 1997 to 2007, a full 10 years, the federal minimum wage was stagnant at $5.15 an hour. So many states chose to enact their own higher minimum wages during this time period. And according to research by the Fiscal Policy Center, the states that raised their minimum wage had lower unemployment than the ones that didn't. Now, there are many variables at play here, so I can't say with any certainty that these states did better on unemployment because of the minimum wage increase, but it certainly didn't hurt them. My current home state of Washington, pardon me, has raised the state minimum wage every year since 1999, and it now has the highest minimum wage in the country at $11 an hour. Washington's unemployment rate is currently 5.5%. You compare that to my former home state of Louisiana, where there is no state minimum wage and unemployment is at 6.9%. In South Dakota, the minimum wage is about $8.65 an hour, which is $1.40 above the federal minimum wage of $7.25, and their unemployment rate is only 2.9%. In Massachusetts, which is another state with an $11 an hour minimum wage, tied for the top spot if you don't count D.C., unemployment in Massachusetts is at 3.6%. Now, for the sake of honesty, there are states with low minimum wages and low unemployment. And there are states with high minimum wages and higher unemployment. Washington, my current home, is actually not that great at 5.5%, when the national average is about 5% unemployment. There are a lot of variables at play here, but the point is there seems to be little to no effect on unemployment rates from raising the minimum wage. Tons of states have done it without seeing spikes in unemployment, and we've raised the federal minimum wage several times in our country's history, and there's been no consistent uptick in unemployment afterwards. Sometimes it actually goes down. The next argument against increasing the minimum wage that you make is that it'll lead to prices going up. Now, you cite McDonald's and Walmart as two places where this effect would be pronounced. Well, in the case of McDonald's, the studies have been conducted, and while not all of the studies reach the same conclusion, most agree that the price hike from raising the minimum wage would be negligible. The lowest estimate I was able to find was about 17 cents onto the cost of every Big Mac. The highest estimate I found was about 64 cents onto the price of each Big Mac. But in a country where the average worker is making at least $15 an hour, paying even $1 more per Big Mac would be totally acceptable as a side effect. The fear, I think, from a lot of conservatives is that these companies will control costs by firing employees rather than raising prices. But I really think people will be willing to pay moderately higher prices for the sake of a much higher wage. Now, there are other threats posed to these jobs by things like automation, but those threats are going to exist regardless of the wages being paid to employees. That is, unless we enact some sort of legislation that's anti-automation, which I have mixed feelings about, but that's really a totally different topic. As for Walmart, they've been raising their wages for a while now due to huge worker dissatisfaction. Walmart is now a $10 an hour job. And do you know what? Their turnover rates have gone way down because it costs about $4,000 in training to replace an employee, and now they don't have to do it nearly as often. It would cost Walmart about $5 billion to raise their wages all the way up to $15 an hour, which sounds like a lot. Until you realize that Walmart generated nearly $500 billion in revenue in 2016 alone, and they posted a net income of $15 billion. They've got tons of money to play with. I guarantee you Walmart will be fine if we raise the fucking minimum wage. I promise you, your Walmarts won't be hurt. And of course, if we did raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, it would be a tiered process. We wouldn't just raise it overnight. We're not just going to go from $7.25 to $15. This would be rolled out slowly over a span of years and years. But once it reaches its mark, let's then tie the minimum wage to inflation and to cost of living so that we never need to have this stupid debate again. It'll just automatically go up as it needs to every year. So let's move on to your assertions about the minimum wage being mostly for teenagers and people just entering the workforce. Well, here's the reality. The average age of a person working a minimum wage job right now is 35 years old. In 1979, 27% of minimum wage workers were teenagers. But by 2013, only 12% of minimum wage workers were teenagers. And 54% of all minimum wage workers work full-time. And an additional 32% work at least half-time, which is considered to be 20 to 34 hours a week. 34 hours a week is half-time. So who the fuck is working a 68-hour week? But it is true when you say that not everyone working a minimum wage job is poor. About 12% of minimum wage workers actually come from households with incomes over $100,000 a year. But for the majority of minimum wage workers, their employment represents half of their household annual income. So most people making minimum wage are reliant on the income that they make from it. And since the minimum wage isn't really enough to live on, the incomes of minimum wage workers are supplemented by social programs that are paid for by tax dollars. For instance, 52% of fast food workers are on some form of public assistance. 46% of childcare workers, 48% of home care workers. And here's the real bitch of a statistic. 56% of government assistance is going to people from working families at a cost of about $70 or $80 billion a year to the taxpayers. These people are working, but they're making so little money that they have to rely on government programs to meet their basic needs. Now that's outrageous to me. I think it should be outrageous to all of us. What happens when companies don't pay their employees enough money to live on? I'll tell you what happens. The taxpayers foot the bill. Why should you and I have to pay for working people to have their basic needs? If they're working, then their employers should be taking care of that. Social programs, which I do believe in, should be for people who can't work or who can't find work, not for people who are just getting fucking stiffed by greedy corporations that employ them. So the last point that you made on this issue that I want to address is that Bernie's beloved Sweden has no minimum wage whatsoever. And this is true. But it's also sort of deceptive to just leave it at that, because Sweden has a very different sort of system in place than we do. Unions are much stronger in Sweden, and wages are by and large decided by collective bargaining agreements. In fact, the reason Sweden doesn't have a minimum wage is because the unions feel that it would interfere with their collective bargaining negotiations. Instead of the Swedish government setting a minimum wage, they instead have laws prohibiting anti-union discrimination. And the unions negotiate the wages. So if you get a job as a barista in Sweden, your wage isn't guaranteed by the government, but by a trade union that you belong to. So Naked Ape's rhetoric on Sweden is sort of a lie of omission.
A tax on Wall Street speculation. Yeah, this is how we're gonna stick it to those dirty rich people. We're gonna tax them and take away all their dirty money. Except that 37% of all investments in Wall Street are held by various retirement plans. That means pension funds for teachers' unions and Grandpa's 401k plan. Right away, you should be seeing the reason why this plan is fucking retarded. Or at least you should if A, you've ever invested in the stock market, or B, ever taken a class in basic economics. You see, there's a grand game of speculation when it comes to all things related to the stock market. And like the Grand Duke of the Apocalypse, Glenn Beck, has told me, the only thing you can count on is gold. But a good average expert opinion is you can expect a yearly return of 6% over a 10-year period if you invested in Wall Street today. Let's assume a monetary inflation of 2.5% yearly, and let's assume there's a management fee of 0.5%. Then your expected return isn't 6%, it's actually 3%. And let's not forget, you still have to pay taxes on that money when you take it out of the market, which is your capital gains rate of 15% on all profits. So the entirety of that 7% return is cut by 15%. So you can probably expect less than 2% in real profits annually from any investments. We're living large. But Bernie Sanders wants to put a sales tax, a fucking sales tax of 0.5% every single time you make any trade. This means you get to buy or sell any given stock 4 times in any given year before you're actually losing money. And that's a pretty big deal because a third of all investment in the stock market is in foreign funds. And guess what? They're not gonna invest if they're gonna lose money, you old fucking socialist crank. And neither will domestic investors. And I know that as a fact because Sweden also tried Bernie's Wall Street tax plan. And somewhere from 90 to 99% of traders left Sweden to go trade in London. But the 1950s had a much higher tax rate, and you're a conservative, so you like the 1950s, right? Shut the fuck up. You know what else we had in the 1950s? 27% of the entire world's GDP. That's because every other industrialized country had been invaded twice during World War II. But the fact that this is even an argument shows how vapid and unoriginal your political positions really are.
Bernie Sanders' plan was to tax trades at 0.5% for stocks and 0.1% for bonds, which does raise the cost of investing, but it also makes it harder for high-frequency traders to game the system by using computer-generated high-speed trading to their advantage. To advantage themselves over everyday people who just want to invest in the fucking market. Let's be clear on who this tax affects. The average person isn't selling and trading stocks all day hoping to eke every penny out of the market that they can. The average investor makes investments and waits for them to grow. They don't buy and sell all day long using advanced algorithms that read the market faster than any human mind possibly could. And that's who this affects. People who are, in my opinion, basically parasites in the first place. They don't actually invest in things. They just exploit the market. Their money is never in one place long enough for it to be considered a real investment. It's like if I have a company and I'm holding $1 and you give me $1, like here's $1, and then the company grows enough for the dollar to be worth $1.01, and then you're like, give me it back. And then you go to someone else and do the same fucking scam. You just collect a bunch of pennies here and there. You're not an actual fucking investor at that point. You're just an exploiter. Now, Naked Ape, you talk about Sweden trying something similar to very poor effect, and I'm pretty sure you're talking about the Swedish financial transaction tax that was enacted from 1984 to 1991, which was similar to Bernie's plan and which was disappointing in terms of generating revenue. That's why they got rid of it. It was a failure. You're right. But actually, you got to take a little bit broader of a perspective than that than just pointing like this. It didn't work here, so it won't ever work. Because actually, financial transaction taxes are pretty fucking common these days. In 2011, there were 40 countries who had such taxes in effect, and these taxes generated $38 billion in revenue. So Sweden's failure is not something that's set in stone for anyone trying to do a financial transaction tax. I don't pretend for a minute to understand the intricacies of Sweden's financial system or any other country's fucking financial system for that matter, but what's clear is that while financial transaction taxes can fail, they usually don't. And Bernie Sanders, by the way, was not naive about the possibility of his proposed speculation tax driving down the trading. The pages, they 404 now, but if you visited Bernie's website back in the day, you'd see that his proposal factored in as much as a 50% drop in speculation. And even with that 50% drop being factored in, the revenue generated was still enough to pay for his free college plan, which is what you're actually about to talk about next.
Free college. Free college. So in Bernie's America, you won't be able to get a job, low-wage earners will be replaced by touchscreens, you'll never be able to retire, but at least you'll have a worthless fucking degree from an adult daycare center, and it'll be free. Except it'll actually be paid for with taxes, which means that instead of you getting a loan to pay for college, you'll force all of the successful people to pay for your college degree. And remember all of those minority children who couldn't get into college because either they didn't have enough money to pay for bills or they had to drop out of high school to get a job to feed their family? Well, guess what? Their taxes are gonna be paying for your worthless college degree. So minority children, the poor, people who only got a high school education, and then successful people will all be paying for worthless college degrees by worthless people. So instead of a STEM major and an English major both paying the same for their college degree, now the STEM major and Juan, who dropped out of high school to get a job to buy food for his family, will pay for everybody's degrees. Socialism! And it's not like Bernie is going to cut any of the high costs for college. He's just going to give colleges a blank check from the government, paid for by the taxpayer. Socialism! At least that job at Starbucks will pay $15 an hour. Bernie Sanders is a fucking moron, and that's why I hate Bernie Sanders.
I'm sorry, but I'm very confused by your argument here. I feel you've gone somewhat off the rails. You're saying that free college is a bad idea because poor people and successful people are going to foot the bill somehow? Okay, so Bernie's proposal is to use the aforementioned tax on Wall Street speculation to offset the majority of costs associated with free college tuition for everybody. So it won't be the poor people footing the bill because poor people don't tend to be Wall Street speculators. Successful people, yeah, they'll be footing the bill if they're Wall Street speculators. And I'm pretty okay with that. I don't see why anyone wouldn't be okay with that. So look, Naked Ape, our country is falling behind in a lot of ways. We're ranked 14th in education, 44th in healthcare efficiency, 46th in freedom of the press, 24th in literacy. We have the 9th most educated workforce. None of this is really excusable. We should be number 1 in education, number 1 in healthcare, number 1 in freedom of the press, number 1 in literacy, and we should have the most educated workforce. Instead, we're number 1 in incarceration. We used to be number 1 in obesity, but I guess Mexico and maybe a few other countries have passed us. Number 1 in divorce, number 1 in car thefts, number 1 in people on prescription drugs, number 1 in women who are on antidepressants, number 1 in student debt, number 1 in student debt. Another good reason to make college free, don't you think? I mean, Naked Ape, you voted for the guy who wants to make America great again, right? Well, explain to me how we can be great if we're stupid and unskilled. You might think that college is nothing but an adult daycare center, but let me ask you this. If you're boarding an airplane, do you want it designed by an aeronautic engineer or a high school dropout? Because I'll be happy to design a plane for you, but you're going to die if you try to ride it because I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. If you're going into heart surgery, do you want it performed by a woman who went to medical school or some chick who binged a bunch of fucking episodes of ER and thinks she's got the general idea? Let's take the fatal element away from it. Let's just say you're getting your taxes done. Everyone's got to pay taxes. Do you want them done by someone with a degree in accounting, or do you want them done by a fucking redneck with a calculator? The fact is that you and me and all of us rely every day on the skill set of people who learned their craft at college. We all rely on them. And this new wave of anti-intellectualism that is represented in large part by the president that you helped elect is just rat poison in our country's veins. We are tremendously served by having an educated populace. The only advantage to having a stupid populace is that they're easier to control. So why are you taking up for the controllers? You're not a controller. Why are you taking up for the owners of this country? You're not an owner. Why are you representing the best interest of the elites? Because I don't think you're a fucking elite. So why take their side? Do you think they're going to give you a fucking cookie or something? Bernie Sanders' plan to make tuition free, as has been done successfully in countries like Norway, Sweden, Finland, Slovenia, Germany, and even fucking Brazil. No offense, Brazil, I didn't expect it from you. It's not some pie in the sky fucking fantasy. It's a tangible benefit that goes beyond just feeling entitled to free stuff. I think that a large part of the problem here is that you view free college through a very myopic lens of these entitled people who just want free stuff. And you've blinded yourself to the greater national good that comes from having a more educated workforce. And look, free college, I will admit, is not the be-all, end-all of getting there. Because the 3 countries with the most 25 to 34-year-olds with some college education are South Korea, Japan, and Canada, all of which do charge tuition. So free college doesn't automatically mean the populace takes advantage of it. You have to also foster a culture that appreciates learning, and appreciates intelligence, and appreciates institutions of higher education, rather than labeling them adult daycare centers and acting like the SJWs that we all like to make fun of in videos somehow represent all college students. It's a disingenuous argument, Mr. Undressed Simeon. So I don't think Bernie Sanders is a moron. I think that he has very good, nuanced ideas that are carefully and painstakingly designed to solve some of the most pervasive problems facing American society. I would never argue that Sanders' solutions are flawless or beyond criticism, because no solutions ever are. And every solution is always going to come with a new set of problems attached to it. But in every case that you brought up here, I think the solutions proposed by Sanders solve more problems than they create. And the Democratic Party would do well to embrace a more Sanders-esque platform moving forward. Because in my opinion, it's the platform you really need to see to it not only that Trump loses, but that there will never be another Trump, and that Trump's vision for America dies the obscure and whimpering death that it probably deserves. Thank you all for watching, especially you, Naked Ape, if you did indeed watch. I appreciate all of you, and I hope that you will all do me the favor of subscribing to my channel and following me on Twitter and Facebook. I hope that you will all buy my shirt. All the pertinent links are in the description section of this video. I am TJ Kirk. Peace the fuck out.